Hello, everyone. My name is Clayton Rumley, and today I'm talking about my first mobile game, Lightslap, and the long, strange journey it's been. But first, a little bit, as in too much, about me. Ever since 5-year-old me saw my grandmother playing Donkey Kong on a ColecoVision, I knew I wanted to make games. My family didn't get a computer until I was 15, though, so I focused more on mainstream dreams like being an astronaut or billionaire industrialist. But in 1991, my junior high English teacher, Paul Longton, introduced me to AppleSoft Basic, and I discovered I had a natural aptitude for coding. I dreamed big of going to Silicon Valley, and when I finished my BSc in computer science, I applied to EA Games several times and never heard from them. But fate kept me stuck here. I ended up working just about 20 years for Red River College developing web applications at a time when a lot of people didn't have the internet in their house yet. So if you're familiar with Red River, if you've used something more public facing like Catalog or Hub or more internal stuff like Caselog, I was the architect behind all those systems. During those 20 years, I also became a father to 4 lovely girls, 3 of whom still live at home and drive me crazy. And the combination of Ubisoft coming to Winnipeg in 2018 and the work from home nature of the pandemic gave me the opportunity to finally achieve my life goal of working in the video game industry. And I've been with Ubisoft since October of 2020. Me personally, I'm a big time introvert. I have a really weird sense of humor, and all that rolled together makes me terribly socially awkward. Uh, I also finished my first novel, Holocene, this past December. So when it gets published, expect me to start plugging that. So due to the nature of my pre-Ubisoft day job, I've never really considered myself a game dev. Reality is, though, I've been trying to build games for my entire programming life. Sadly, I don't have any pictures of the games I wrote for Apple computers or the early Macs I had access to in junior high. I do have one screenshot of a Windows 3.1 game I made in my teens called Misti's Memory. It was built as a game for kids, but I had no way to market or distribute it. It had lots of options, and I actually played it a lot while chatting on the phone with friends. In 2005, after making a Sudoku solver, I turned it into an entire game called Shisai Sudoku and gave it away for free. It unexpectedly blew up and had over 50,000 downloads. If I knew how to properly monetize and market things, I wouldn't be here today because I'd be busy rolling around in the piles of money I could have made from that. So 10 years later, I took an online Unity game course at udemy.com. And since my programming skills at that point were way above their intended audience, I did the Arcanon Clone project as an over-the-top backstory-driven game that parodied Metal Gear Solid in the cutscenes, and it was a lot of fun to do. Finally, in 2017, I attended my first ever Peg Jam, where I tried to build a way too complicated game called Welcome to Pellet Town, where the player discovers that their world is a lie. I didn't get very far with it. In 2019, I attended the last pre-pandemic Peg Jam where I created Worlds in Parallel, a web-based multiplayer game where 2 players launch missiles at each other's planets, having to navigate an asteroid field, kind of like Frogger. And in 2020 for Ludum Dare 46, I made a massive multiplayer game in 3JS based on Conway's Game of Life, which got me some pretty high rankings at the end of the competition. And I've started a whole bunch of other things that ultimately went nowhere because at the end of the day, I'm kind of like this. And I know there's a few of you out there that can relate. So I'm also a hobby photographer, and I have connections with a few other photographers in the city. When the pandemic hit, it basically meant that photographers couldn't shoot anymore, and models were taking awkward selfies with their phones. So I had this brilliant idea. It's basically an app that models can install on their phone that lets photographers view them through the camera, direct their poses using text to speech, and then take a high res photo in RAW format and upload it to the photographer. Once I learned enough Java to have a rough proof of concept working on my phone, I bought a Google Play developer's license. Unfortunately, this project did not go beyond the proof of concept phase, like a lot of my other projects. So in August of 2021, I received this message from Google Play telling me that because I haven't actually added any apps to the store yet, they're going to close my developer account and I'm going to lose my registration fee, which is non-refundable, and blah, blah, blah. Well, I wasn't going to let that happen. So I quickly came up with a plan in operation. Let's not have wasted that money. I decided to make a game and I was going to treat it like a game jam. which for me means keep it simple, stupid. Don't try to create Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto. That means no backstory, no levels. You don't have time to make 1,000 levels and stuff unless you're going to procedurally generate something. And I'm not consistent enough of an artist to do game art. So it'll have to be really basic and graphics and basic UI. So I know C# really well, and I'm half decent at Unity. Unity has an Android build option. So that makes the logical choice there. And for the love of Satan, I should try to actually make some money. I don't want this to play out like Chisai Sudoku, where if I happen to make something popular and don't monetize it, I miss out. Now, with any project and any plan, you have to understand what some of the risks and challenges were going to be. I had from August till October to make this game. And I knew Unity, but I had no idea how to do an Android build. So I was going to have to learn that. I had no idea how to do advertising in Unity, so I had to learn that too. And I had no idea how one actually goes about setting up an app in Google Play Console. And because of all of these things, there's a risk that I might not make something and get it in the store on time. And finally, the regular fear that every game creator has. My approach for this fear was to have fun and treat this game as a trial run for future games. My main goals this time around were just to keep my account active and learn how to deploy a Unity game to Google Play. So with that in mind, I started coming up with some basic rules for design. As I said before, no levels. It's just a game that goes on forever. I initially considered a runner game like Subway Surfer, but runner games require a lot of art, or it's not my forte. I thought about some visually simpler games. My wife's first-gen iPad had a balloon game where you have to keep tapping on floating balloons to prevent them from popping. And if I recall, the balloons were multicolored, but the color was completely irrelevant. So I flipped that idea and decided to make a game where you purposefully popped something based on the color. So why did I choose hands? Well, two reasons. Photoshop already had a hand shape in it, so I didn't have to draw anything. And second, the hands were like colored lights, and you tapped or slapped them to make them pop. I searched Google Play Store, and there wasn't anything called Lightslap, so I just went with that. I also thought it'd be cool if the music changed depending on your health. For a game that has you watching the playing field, you can't keep looking at your health meter, so it would be a good audio cue to how you're. It'd be an audio cue to how good you're doing. Similar in concept to the quacking noise that starts playing over the track in Parappa the Rapper when you're rapping bad or awful, or when the crowd starts clapping and cheering in Guitar Hero. So after a few days, I had a prototype in Unity. I had a hand prefab that translated along the y-axis each frame. I had a spawn area defined that determined where the hands would appear just above the top of the screen. And there's extra logic to prevent hands from overlapping. I had a kill zone at the bottom to remove hands that got to the bottom that the user didn't tap on, which keeps the number of active objects in the game under control. I had some music whose rhythm drives the game. And I added some code to randomly choose the next target color from the available colors. And to make the game increase in difficulty, the number of available colors increases at predefined time intervals. For the UI, I had a vertical bar on the left that showed the current target color you're supposed to be tapping on, and I put a health meter on the right. I also recorded my voice and ran it through filters to make it sound weird. I was originally going to use my youngest daughter to do the voice because kids' voices are cute, but when the two older ones heard about it, they raised such a stink that I kicked them all off the project and did it myself. And finally, really ugly looking graphics drawn by yours truly, especially that terrible placeholder logo. If you're wondering why the hand is white, it's so that I can set the color on the sprite renderer for each instance of the prefab without having to create a copy of the hand for each color. So just a few notes about audio in Lightslap. My original plan was to have several tracks playing simultaneously, just faded in or out based on the health of the player. I started with a simple bass line and then two tracks, one for kick drum and one for snare drums. I probably did something wrong, but I could not get the audio tracks to sync up, so I just left the bass track in my game. And fun fact for anybody who's had a chance to play the game, the Talking Heads 1997 song Psycho Killer inspired the melody of the bass line. Oh yeah, and yeah, I just left the bass track in. So once I had the prototype, I had to try and get it on my phone, which is a Google Pixel 4. When I went into the build settings dialog, the options looked pretty straightforward, even if I didn't fully understand them all. Unfortunately, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Clicking on the player settings button in the bottom left brings up this. And those accordion panels down there, icon, resolution, and presentation, splash image, other settings, and publishing settings, is just full of things that need to be configured. And it really isn't clear just by looking at them what you're supposed to do. I ended up reading a few different walkthroughs online, and in the publishing settings section at the bottom, the key store stuff was probably the most complicated bit. That's where you have to set up a digital key to sign the assembly with and whatever. But I muddled through it and eventually produced a file that I could upload to Google Play Console and then install onto my phone with myself as an internal tester. So the next step was putting advertisements in the game. Now, as I've said before, I'm bad at monetization and marketing, but I'm not bad at those things because I lack the ability to do it. The truth is, I hate ads. I hate marketing. I don't like it when people try to manipulate me, and I don't like manipulating people. But a guy's got to eat. So I compromised. Simple banner ads. No watching 30 seconds of someone playing a game that doesn't actually exist just to trick you to installing another bejeweled clone. No ads during gameplay, just title screen, pause screen, help screen. My game is about tapping frantically. Ads on the playing field are going to equal accidental clicks. That might make more money for me, but after a couple of times, I think users will just stop playing the game if they get too frustrated. So, who should be the ad provider? Well, Unity comes with its own built-in ad delivery system. It's documented. It's super easy to set up, but there are no ads, so it's pointless. If you ever look into this, don't waste your time with it. And ultimately, I went back to Google. Google AdMob has lots of ads, and it's easy to set up an account. And it also has a Unity control that generates warnings every time you press the play button. And it's so annoying because I hate seeing messages in the console window that I didn't put there myself. So Lightslap is not a very cerebral game. It contains nothing controversial unless giving high fives is a rude gesture in your culture. I consider it a fidget game, a game that captures your attention but doesn't require a lot of brain power on your part to play. Thus, I figured it would be safe to list it as a game for kids. Well, doing that required even more forms to be filled out in Play Console, plus you had to create an entire privacy policy and host it on an external website. So I spun up lightslap.digify.ca and searched around and found a few examples of privacy policies for children's games that would satisfy Google. And I kind of mashed them all together into something that we all know nobody will ever read. Google has not complained about this. As part of its data safety requirements, Google also makes you fill out a long form about your app and any third-party plugins that you might have in your app. The only plugin I had was Google AdMob. Now, these questions are really specific and require you to have a good understanding of what your plugins are doing. So make sure you choose your plugins wisely because they expect you to talk about them. Now, since AdMob was a Google product used by a lot of Android app developers, I assumed AdMob would have this information available on the website. Of course, I was wrong. It provided some high-level details, but none of the specifics that Google Play Console expects you to provide. So, for example, Google Play Console will say, what do you or your third parties do with a specific piece of information or personal data? How long do you hold on to it? What's the disposal process, etc.? I don't know. I didn't write AdMob, and they're not telling me. So I ended up finding someone posting online about answering these questions for an earlier version of Google Play Console, and I copied what I could and made up the rest. Again, Google didn't complain. So a bit about Google Play Console. It's built around delivery tracks and releases of your code. Internal testing allows you to have up to 100 internal testers, which makes sense for larger game studios, I guess. Closed testing is your alpha track, and open testing is the beta track, and then from there it's production. I initially just rolled out releases to myself in the internal testing track. And once you're done with your internal testing, you can promote your release to a higher track. There's two things I want to warn you about, though. Uploading a new release. Sometimes I forget to advance my slides. Uploading a new release requires Google to review and approve it, which can take days. I didn't notice the delay during internal testing, so either they don't review on the internal track or it's a much faster process. Promoting a release to a higher track requires a similar review that seems to take about the same amount of time. What really sucks about this is that even if the release was approved in your alpha track and you've made no other changes, promoting it to the beta track triggers another days-long review. I didn't realize this a few days ago and jumped the gun announcing that my app was available for everyone who wanted to beta test it when the link I was passing out wasn't even enabled yet by Google. So that sucked. Also, if you're developing an Android app, in the player section of the project settings, in the other settings accordion collapsible block, is the bundle version code. Is so poorly named. This translates to the actual release number that Google Play Console uses. And of course, that number is not exposed by any API, so you can't access it programmatically. The version number right above, where I have 0.9 in my example here, is accessible programmatically, so you can have on your title screen a little text label with the version number in it. But if you want that bundle version code to also show up there, you have to manually edit it and make sure that you put that there, which is what I have to do every time I make a change. So now that all the Google Play stuff is figured out, I'd like to talk about some of the actual design aspects of the game. Something I did different with this project than with other Unity projects I've experimented with was the user interface. Getting the UI to scale properly on mobile devices was a challenge, especially when you're just working on a desktop. And rather than create a separate scene and canvas for the title screen, the game over screen, etc., and then having to make sure all the canvas settings were in sync, I just created each part of the interface as a separate parent object in one, or a separate parent object underneath the canvas in the one main scene. The game engine code shows and hides each section depending on the state of the game. I probably could have done it even fancier in a component-driven method, but it didn't occur to me until later. The actual canvas settings that I found that worked best with Pixel phones is on the right there. One neat side effect of doing it this way is that the faint star field background I create is present on all screens, and there's also no interruption to the music because you're always still in the same scene. The one odd man out is the help about screen in my game, which I created at the very end and put it in its own scene, so it has its own separate canvas. And sure enough, I forgot to make it match the main canvas's settings at least once during this process when I was putting out versions. So by the time I hit alpha, which is the closed testing track, a lot of changes had been made based on my own experiences playing the game on my phone and feedback from a few people I handed my phone to so that they could try. I realized that the target color bar on the left was just too hard to notice when playing. So I made the entire border around the screen the target color. So no matter where you're looking on the screen, you know what color you should be tapping on. To make it clear that you had to get rid of hands before they reached the bottom of the screen, I added menacing lightning bolts that destroy the hands, and when they hit that, it lowers your health bar. I added some small particles that briefly burst when you pop a hand so that it looks more interesting than the hands just disappearing. They match the color of the hand if that was the target color, but if it wasn't the target color or if the lightning hits the hands, then the particles are gray. I fixed the terrible looking logo and added a better font from Google Fonts. And of course, I added mute buttons for the audio and the music so that parents can quiet the game when they give it to their kids to play during church or whatever to keep them quiet. I also added two extremely rare power-ups. They're in the bottom right here. Ankhs give you an extra life. That's the Egyptian symbol for life, if people are unfamiliar with it. So if you die and you have one or more Ankhs, then the board is immediately cleared and reset to just having the red color available, but you're still alive, so that it kind of just resets the game, but you still keep your points and everything. The other is a bomb that destroys all other hands of that color. Power-ups can only be collected if the hand holding them matches the target color when you slap them. I added a help about screen, which I mentioned. I also added tracking of high scores, best time, and your best streak, and that is uninterrupted taps of the right color. And I built in a score multiplier based on your streak. So if the longer you don't make mistakes, the higher your score gets. So I was now ready for some alpha testers. Counting myself, I had 5 alpha testers. And that was really all I needed to start getting some suggestions and complaints. Right off the hop, there were scaling issues that I had to figure out with Unity's canvas. It took a few tries to get it right. Hope I did. Those canvas settings I showed a few slides back are what I found worked on my Pixel phone and a couple other models of Pixel phones out there. Really good feedback came from Matthew Welk with respect to accessibility. So I added textures to each color to make them visually distinct. If that's for anybody with a color impairment, then it's at least noticeable. I also texture the target color border appropriately. I added to the pop effect to make it more obvious that a hand was popped. I added that ring that you see in the video there and increased the size of the particles as they get popped. You can see that hands that hit the lightning at the bottom go gray. And to help users keep track of the rhythm of the game when the music isn't playing, the target color hands throb with the beat, and the slap message up at the top center of the screen has exclamation marks that disappear with each beat, acting as a countdown to the next random color selection. Issues with my hand spawning algorithm were also causing overlap, especially when you got about 2 minutes into the game and purple hands start showing up. It took me a bit to track down that bug, but so far from my testing, I think that has been fixed. My original algorithm was also just to pick a color from the list of available colors as the current target color. That could be problematic if there's only one red hand in a sea of blue and it randomly picks red. Now my algorithm tries to determine how many hands are on the screen, orders them by most to least, and selects the most with a small probability of picking one of the others just to keep it interesting. I've also had the suggestion to show what the next color is going to be, like how Tetris shows you the next piece. But as I'm selecting the color based on how many hands are on the screen, it's hard to pick ahead when the user is actively destroying hands and potentially changing that number. So all in all, it's been a pretty good process, and I've had really good testers. I don't know if Lightslap will ever be good enough to win any awards, but it will be a playable game, and it'll keep my Google Play account alive, and goals are accomplished. So what's next for me? Well, I have some minor user interface stuff I'll fix once release 18 is live. It is still in review, even though it's been a couple days now. So yeah, I'm waiting for it to get into the beta track. And once it's in beta and I fix a couple of little issues in that, I will deploy to production, and then I will become an official indie game developer. And then, of course, profit. Just from testing, I've earned 27 cents in ad revenue, so it's time to start planning my retirement. And after all this, come hell or high water, I am recreating Chisai Sudoku as an Android app. And that is my presentation. Thank you all so much for attending and sitting through all this. And if you have any questions, please ask away.